I'm not as tall as Steven, so I guess I'll use this mic. Right. Once I got started writing this speech, I had difficulty stopping because the math department here is truly like a second home to me. Thankfully, I'm not allowed to speak all that long, so I'll keep the focus fairly narrow. The Michigan math department, my impressions of mathematicians, and the value of a math degree. Of course, I'll always have an attachment to the physical features and memories of the math department here. The nonsense on the walls of the Nesbitt room, the cozy threadbare armchairs in the atrium, the click-clack of chalk, the savory bitterness of coffee. After finishing a late night, walking lightly down South University, only sometimes in daylight. The department here is big but small. Big because there are people interested in so many different things, but small because you can always find a tight-knit group. The people here are welcoming and smart and demanding and passionate. They're what makes this department great, and what set an excessively high bar for my evaluation of any other place I might go. My intention is to work with mathematicians for a very long time, and luckily for me, mathematicians are great people to be around. I think a good way of capturing my impression of mathematicians is with what I call the mathematician's slang. Now, for friends and family, it may not be obvious to you, but mathematicians tend to talk in a very specific way. I think it comes from an aversion to saying something false or that you don't mean, and also just from long exposure to math. Occupational hazard, I guess. The best way to demonstrate it is by example. A few weeks ago, I was out to dinner with some professors at a nice restaurant, which one of them was very familiar with. They had another location as well, and the professor assured us that the food at the two places was basically isomorphic. Now, this captured exactly what he meant. Of course, it wasn't exactly the same. It was prepared by different chefs, but it had the same components and structure, isomorphic. Some old words begin to take on new meanings as well. I took a class last semester with some friends, and the professor introduced an object usually denoted with a Gothic letter G. The Gothic font is somewhat difficult to write by hand, so the professor usually just wrote normal G's on the blackboard, but my friend was interested to know what it would look like when typeset. Now, for background, there's a typesetting program called LaTeX, that's spelled with an X, like latex gloves, that mathematicians and scientists like to use to type up their equations. This fact will be important in a moment. So anyway, my friend pulled out his phone and Google image searched LaTeX Gothic G. Now, what he thought he wrote was, of course, LaTeX Gothic G, but what Google thought he wrote was latex Gothic G, which has a very different meaning. So to his surprise, images of women revealingly clad in tight black clothing far outnumbered funny-looking letter Gs. Let me emphasize that this was in the middle of class and he wasn't in the back row. There were no disasters, although he probably cleared his browser history that evening. But what I'm trying to get at with these stories is the curiosity and precision that define mathematical thinking, and therefore those that make a living studying it. I really do view math as a way of bettering myself. Math is almost unique in the way it challenges you to bend your thinking, so studying it is really training yourself to think. No matter whether you make your living studying math or practicing it or doing something that on the surface has nothing to do with it, you'll still be using your degree. You'll run into problems and have to come up with solutions. You'll have to learn something new, be terribly confused, and eventually unravel it. You'll have to communicate a new idea to somebody and listen to critiques from them. Who knows whether you'll have to prove the rank nullity theorem again, but the skills you learned in trying to puzzle it out will last you for life. Thank you.